Hi, everyone. This is Dawn Richard, also known as The Awakening with Dawn, and this is the Wake Up to Real Love podcast, where we share stories of struggles and triumphs in love, sex, and relationships, along with expert advice to create more conscious connections. I'm super honored and excited today to welcome my guest, Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Welcome, Dr. Alexandra.
It's so good to be with you, Dawn.
I'm so excited to have you here. You are an amazing woman. Period. You are a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at Northwestern University, a licensed clinical psychologist at the Family Institute at Northwestern University, a regular contributor at Psychology Today, and author of Taking Sexy Back: How to Own Your Sexuality and Create the Relationships You Want, as well as the other amazing book, Loving Bravely: 20 Lessons of Self-Discovery to Help You Get the Love You Want, which was featured on the Today Show. She's an international speaker and teacher whose work has been featured on 6 continents. This woman is amazing. We're going to have such a fantastic conversation. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you. I'm glad that we get to do this morning.
Yay, me too. Okay, so my first question is the little icebreaker, and I wanted to just talk about how I think it's so great that you and your daughter did all those masks over this pandemic.
Yes. Yeah, I had just seen somewhere on Facebook that our healthcare workers are having the experience of their ears getting sore. You know, like your mask just kind of hooks in over your ears. And at the end of a 12-hour shift, your ears are just raw and in pain. And so a gal had taken a headband and sewn 2 buttons on, and now she hooks her mask around. And so I was like, okay, you know, and I think that one of our least favorite feelings as human beings is to feel helpless. And so I'm aware that my best work is to stay home, right? I am not a frontline worker, so my best work is to stay home, but staying home can feel really helpless, and I can feel really like kind of guilty about my privilege and all of that kind of swirl. And so this has been helpful. So my daughter and I, as you say, we've been tucking in on the couch at night and we sew bands, and we've so far delivered about 300.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
We've got another batch ready to go pretty soon. And you know what's a funny connection is Leah Marshall, who created the Esther Perel discussion group that you and I
how we met. Yeah.
She's a Chicago gal, and so she bikes up from the city and delivers me more buttons. So she's my button gal. So she gets me the buttons, and then Courtney and I sew them into these headbands, and we're gonna make a batch for our local grocery stores as well pretty soon here. But we've been prioritizing our hospitals, especially our COVID. We've got a hospital in the area who's all COVID now, and so we're making sure the bands get there. So it's felt good.
What a beautiful gift. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for bringing it up. Thanks for bringing it up. It's sort of,
So how did your daughter, I remember seeing a picture on Facebook of your daughter having the book open, Taking Sexy Back. And I thought, is she really reading that? Because after I read it, I, presented it to my almost 17-year-old daughter, and she's like, I don't want to read that. I don't want to talk to you about that.
No, right. Oh, no, she has not gotten very far.
How old is she again?
She's only 15.
Yeah. Okay. Because I wanted to ask you, everybody hears about sex through different ways and means, right? So how did you hear about sex? What did you learn about sex growing up?
Right. I remember I feel like my sex education was relatively neutral. I certainly feel grateful that I had never gotten some of the messages around purity. And, in the book, we talk about many, many people who grow up in more conservative, especially Christian conservative communities, grow up with these object lessons where the teacher will take, for example, a piece of tape and everybody sticks the tape to their arm. And it kind of shows this idea that you lose your ability to bond if you have multiple sexual partners, or they will rub something all over the ground and put it in dirt and sort of show that this is who you become if you've had sex. So I didn't have any of those common and directly shaming messages around sex. Certainly I had a pretty basic biological education, and then I had a lot of silence, and I filled in the silence. I was fascinated by this whole world of not just love. I was fascinated by love and relationships certainly, but I was also fascinated and curious about sex. And I would read these romance novels, these Victoria Holt and Sidney Sheldon, these romance novels with these just really powerful, sex scenes that were not, they were probably more, you know,
Lusty,
be
like
more
lusty.
exact lusty is the perfect word.
Uh-huh.
And I was really pulled in by that, but also feeling like, how does that fit with my sense of myself as being strongly invested in being a straight A student and a good girl, and so I think I just grew up with sort of sex being kind of over here, like not really fitting in with the rest of me.
Yeah, I experienced something quite similar. My
Mhm.
parents, I was raised Catholic, and so, it was basically like sex is for marriage. You
Mhm.
wait till you get married to have sex. I mean, my parents got married when they were 20 and 21. So, it was easier to wait for them,
That long of a wait.
And so, yeah, you have all these conflicting messages of when and where it's appropriate and who it's appropriate with. And so take me sort of along this journey, because I remember also hearing you say that you used to hide and listen to Dr. Ruth. Right.
And it felt like something I couldn't, it felt
Yeah.
like something I couldn't share with anybody. But that was right. I had a Walkman because it was the 80s. And I was just fascinated that there was this whole world of people who would call in and ask her these questions. And she was funny and she was irreverent. And I'm really grateful that I had that experience. I'm like grateful that nobody shamed me out of it. Right.
How
That
many
nobody ever
people
found
how
out.
mid people did you tell?
Right. I told no one, but if I had been caught, right, my mom came and like peeled the comforter back, that didn't happen. I'm glad it didn't happen. I never was made to feel, I got to just have that be a part of me. I mean, it was definitely like sequestered over here, but it
Uh-huh.
wasn't anything that I was made to feel badly about. Nobody knew. So therefore nobody could make me feel badly about it. But then I had also this group of girlfriends that we have a phone call scheduled for tonight. These have been my girls since kindergarten and two since fifth grade. And so
Wow.
all came of age sexually together. And so every first kiss, every, first whatever, we were there breaking it down and talking it through. And that was really my sex education, was with my girlfriends, and making sense of the experiences that we were having together, and laughing and crying. And we couldn't Google anything, right? So we were just sort of figuring it out.
Sitting with it.
That's right. Yeah. And that, I think that remains, the young women I spoke to as I was working on the book shared that as well, that many of them had their sex education filled in by their girlfriends, and
Mm.
and I think that's beautiful. And I worry actually that men don't have that in quite the same way. I'm sure there are groups of men who can talk that through, but we wouldn't tell each other our stories to brag, really. It was just kind of to have each other bear witness to our experiences.
Yeah.
And
Say, is this okay?
right. And does this happen to you? And yeah, what do you
Uh-huh.
think?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, because I feel like most men, they just have the locker room experience. Hey, I got it, or, and it's just
Mhm.
like they don't really talk about the reality of it
Yep. Yeah,
often.
and I don't want to sell men short or make assumptions. I'm sure
Yeah.
there are communities of men that have really heartfelt conversations, but what I mostly hear is that no, that's not really, that's not, there's not permission to feel
Right.
confused, to have questions,
Right.
to be concerned, to feel self-conscious, to feel insecure. That if there were those feelings, which of course there are those feelings, there's not a single person who doesn't feel insecure and vulnerable when it comes to sex.
Yeah.
At least the least we can do is have spaces to give voice to our insecurities and have other people nod and hold eye contact and say, yeah, that makes sense, I get that.
Yeah. So what did you learn from Dr. Ruth?
I don't know specifically. I feel really grateful that my husband, who I've been with now for over 2 decades, I feel grateful that we really found our way together. We've been together for a long, long time, really
Mm-hmm.
most of our adulthood, and that we found our way together. And I'm aware that even though he's been my sexual partner for decades, it still feels vulnerable to talk to him about sex, right? It's one thing to talk to you, and it's
Right.
another thing to talk to the person with whom I'm being intimate. And so I'm aware of that, it's one thing to have the conversation in the abstract or to talk about sex.
Right.
And it is seriously next level to talk to the person you're having sex with about the love you're making, you know?
Well, because you really are naked and coming to the person completely vulnerable, whether it's
Mhm.
inside the bedroom or outside the bedroom. These are like your deepest, innermost workings and longings that, generally for most people, we weren't granted permission to acknowledge or express.
Right. Right. Yep. Yep.
And you talk a lot about that in the book.
Absolutely. And I think that was, I think whenever somebody commits to the process of writing a book, it is a profoundly growing and healing experience. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
aware that that writing Taking Sexy Back opened conversations between my husband and I that we hadn't had before.
Mm-hmm.
It has been, I think for a reader, it's an incredibly permission-giving book, but I think as the writer, it was an incredibly permission-giving book. I have never felt so connected to my clitoris and like it just was like doing all that research about, oh my gosh, like what have we as a world done around female pleasure? Like we have really, really marginalized and silenced and tried to just not even look at what's going on with our genitalia, our clitoris. Like that was a fascinating. It was a fascinating nexus of where my passion about psychology, spirituality, women's studies,
Yep.
politics,
Yep.
it all came
All
together in this
converged.
tiny, right, this like relatively small sexual organ. But it is the story of the clitoris is the story of generations of marginalization of the feminine and contempt um, of feminine pleasure.
Yeah,
Really.
I mean, the fact that the first researcher to actually publish in 1998, was it?
Yep.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah. It was literally so a gender studies professor went through, went through the archives of medical anatomy textbooks and basically found that for generations of these textbooks, the clitoris was just like blurred out, omitted, not even part of the. When you think about the diagram, you think about the sort of the female genitalia diagram, you mostly think about the one of the insides of our bodies, right? The
Right.
uterus, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, which again sort of holds up the idea that those parts of our bodies are for reproduction, kind of
Right.
reinforces that idea.
Right. Right.
Versus a diagram which would be more looking at the external female genitalia, which is really where pleasure at least begins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those diagrams were that the clitoris was left off of that. And as you're saying, that it wasn't until 1998 that the first female urologist in Australia, Helen O'Connell, mapped the full anatomy of the clitoris, and that it is not just just the relatively, it's not always little on everybody, but the
Right.
part that we see on the outside is just the glands, but the organ itself continues. It's usually about 4 inches worth on the inside with erectile tissue and these legs that extend deep into the pubic bone and just kind of reframe.
It's the tip of the iceberg.
It's the tip of the iceberg. That's right.
Right. So
That's right. And how fascinating that for years it was just sort of like, well, the female orgasm, who really understands it? And it's a mystery. But it's a mystery if you don't ask about it, if you don't inquire, if you don't go looking.
well, and I think that's part of why it's so hidden, because it is hidden. And men,
Right.
and men, their penis is out there for them to see, for them to touch. But women, you really have to, who stood over a mirror. This was one thing that I that book, Your Body, Yourselves.
Our body is ourselves.
Our
You're
bodies
right.
ourselves. It was like, oh, I could do that. Like I can actually see it.
That's right. That's right. Yep. And the more that you're right. So there's that sort of that barrier, but even the idea of getting a mirror and looking at ourselves feels sort of, it just feels
Embarrassing.
sort of
Like, yeah.
Yeah. But, and then that reaction, right? To have that reaction about our own bodies, like that, just that squirm or that tensing up, that is the sort of micro first step towards how we exit ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if I can't feel deeply grounded and connected to and proud of that part of me, I have no platform from which to generate sensation, invite my partner in a really excited way. So it's really sad that I think also about my son the other day said the word douche. He was, he's watched a YouTube video and somebody's a douchebag. I was like, can I just tell you?
My kids use that word all the time.
He's can I tell you what that word means? Like what that is? And I talked to him about this whole industry that was built on the idea that women's private areas need more than just
vulvas. You can
the
say
vulva. I can say that. The vulva needs more than just soap and water, which again sends this message that there's something very dangerous, very dirty, quite sort of off limits about that part of our bodies, and that's so sad. And it helps us understand why it's so pervasive that women struggle to have orgasms, have experience sexual desire, feel permission to masturbate, that women just go into the bedroom really, really, really quite oftentimes without the information and kind of gentle, loving connection with their bodies.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not just our sexual anatomy. It's disconnecting from our entire bodies, because we have all of these cultural messages. I mean, did you see that Cynthia Nixon video? Was it about girls?
Yeah.
Mixed messages. You have to be sexy and you can't be sexy, and you have to do this and you can't do this. And it was like, no wonder we have so much confusion and just confusion.
Right. And an absence of sort of like a cohesive narrative. This is who I was, this is who I am, this is who I get to be. And without that sense of like, this is me, this is who I get to be, without that sort of wholehearted sense of who I get to be from what we work on in the book is sort of this inside out definition of my sexuality, my sexual self, my sexual journey. Without that inside out experience, we're not grounded then to advocate, to collaborate with a partner. And so it means we're going to have shitty sex. And the more you have shitty sex, the more you don't want sex. Who wants something that kind of feels like, okay, but I could have made 15 more headbands during that time.
What color do I need to paint the walls?
Yeah, that's right. What's my next book going to be about? If it doesn't feel like an inherently rewarding, motivating experience, we're not going to be. It's going to really compromise our desire for sure.
Yeah. Well, so I listened to your live from Friday, and I was in the car on the way home from my son's house, and I started crying. Because this, you talked about big T trauma and little T trauma, that women, and I hold this because I feel like I carry this collective thing for women about all the ways that we've been hurt and judged and shamed based on our gender, based on our sexuality. So it's like we've either been objectified and used for being female and feminine, or we've been hurt, really hurt and violated. So I wanted to say, I honor all the people who have been hurt through their sexuality. And I think that this is really important to help people heal, because it's like that's when people disconnect, right?
Mhm.
And so this whole process of healing and really learning to reconnect to our bodies and reconnect to our sexuality. I mean, that's why this book is so, like, I'm getting chills.
Mhm.
This book is so profound.
Yeah. It it is yes. Thank you for saying that. Um it is incredible what survive like the what when survivors share their stories,
Yeah.
how that is a piece of healing, and when survivors have the courage and the support and the readiness to go inside and reclaim their bodies and their pleasure, that is just so mighty. And it is so when a survivor does that, she offers healing to herself and she offers healing to the collective. Because as you're saying, there is a way that just the experience of to be born female is to be born into a sort of lowercase t trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where one of my students gave me the example of being told when she was a little girl, when she came downstairs in an outfit, she was told that she was dressed too sexy, and she didn't understand what that meant. Like, too sexy for what? But that was sort of a first step of basically her mom or her parent saying to her, like, your body is dangerous. Your body is dangerous just as it is, right? Just the nature of presenting yourself in a female way, owning any aspect of sexuality puts you at risk, and how incredibly true that is and how incredibly sad that is.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, my daughter said the other day, like, I don't really want to take public transportation home at night because I
Yeah.
am at risk. And so, as female, or I mean, showing up, because most of these things happen, in a power over sort of
Mm-hmm.
way. And so it's like, how do we show up in the world standing fully in our power?
Mm-hmm. Right. That's right. That's right. Well, it's why it was essential to me to write a chapter for men who were either reading this book
Uh-huh.
or who were partnered in some way, whether it's intimate partnership or friendship, whatever relationship it would be. Men partnering with women who are doing this healing and reclamation work. I really wanted, because we can't do it alone, right? We can be as full of our power as we want, but until and unless men are holding space and allying with us and partnering with us and looking at all of the small and huge ways that rape culture perpetuates in our culture, we were just spinning our wheels, right? We really, really need men to partner with us. And it is for multiple reasons. For one reason, I think it's heartbreaking. The more women live in really understandable, legitimate fear,
Mm-hmm.
the more men don't get to step fully into their love and their sensuality and their erotic, because they are at risk of being experienced or experiencing themselves as dangerous,
Right.
predatory,
Right.
and threatening. That is a
Right.
thing I hear over and over from the young men I work with, especially, is just a profound fear of being creepy, a profound fear of making a woman feel scared.
Mm-hmm.
And that's real. And it breaks my heart, right? That a man couldn't fully express his love, right? His love, his interest, for fear of doing harm. And I'm so glad that I am surrounded, that I get to hear about men who are so conscious and so not wanting to create harm.
Uh-huh.
But it speaks to the deep need to kind of like reset, and how we all have a part to play in that.
Yeah, how we all, because I feel like there's this dynamic of power over,
Mm-hmm.
power over, as opposed to showing up equally powerful.
Sure. Yep. Yep. Hmm. Yeah, and both people feeling whether this is a
Safe.
same-sex or heterosexual encounter, both people feeling really deeply authorized to create a sexual experience together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when like there's a men's group on campus at Northwestern that does sexual assault prevention in fraternities and sports for the sports teams. And when they talk about consent, we are luckily moving away from this like no means no definition of consent. And so the image that they use, I love. They work with the male students around defining consent as like a jazz improvisation, where you're just sort of like riffing off each other. And it's not fun. It's not fun to just have your instrument and play it the way you want to play it. What's fun is dipping into like putting something out there, seeing what happens with it, throwing it back to me, I throw it back to you. Like that's the riffing and the improvising and the keeping an eye on each other. That's what makes sex so beautiful. Those are the most beautiful sexual experiences, right? Is where it's just, okay, but what about this? Okay, fun, but what about this? Where it just is, there's that nice flow that can only happen, as you're saying, when both people feel empowered, but both people feel able to hold power.
Well, as you were saying that, I thought it's both people feeling really powerful, as well as both people feeling completely safe and vulnerable to open up in that way. Because I know, you talked in the book about the hookup culture, and it's like, and that's not just for, college age kids.
No, not at all.
It's worldwide, the hookup culture, because people show up, I feel like, in an unconscious way. It's not about necessarily a connection. It's more about, I'm going to use you to fulfill this need that I have, and so I think it's really important to start having all of these conversations. I mean, this is one of the things that I tell my kids. It's like, if you can't talk about sex with the person that you're going to have it with, then perhaps you shouldn't be having it with them.
Yeah, and not from a place of judgment, but just in terms of like a gut check, right? That's a really pretty clear gut check that you aren't quite safe. That something within you or in the space between you isn't quite safe enough to be emotionally vulnerable. And emotional vulnerability is a pretty key ingredient to good sex.
To good sex. That, because a lot of people have a lot of sex, but
sure. Right. Yeah, because without emotion, without the ability to be emotionally vulnerable, sex becomes either performance,
right,
or a duty.
And I think a lot of people show up. I mean, you told a story on Friday about how this young man was saying he didn't want to be, show up as the promiscuous, male and gay male. And, so we have all of these things that we need to unpack.
Right. So often our sexual choices are basically a point or a counterpoint in relation to a fearful story, right? So that example was a young gay man who, finally comes out, he begins to live his truth, but then the next sort of thing he bumps up against is who does he get to be in the sort of hookup culture? Like in his mind, if he were to make out with a guy at a party, he would feel tremendously ashamed of himself because he felt like he was just then the stereotype of the promiscuous gay guy. So here again, it's like he bumps right up against this idea of this sort of imagined audience of people who would be judging him because of his sexual behavior. And so it's like this way in which our sexual self is constantly morphing around these feared ideas of who am I if this happens? Who am I if this happens? We see this with couples too, right? When if one person, it's very easy for a couple to experience a desire discrepancy. You know, like one person is more taking the lead, wants a bit more frequency, wants a bit more adventure, and the other either wants less frequency or a bit more vanilla sexual experiences. And then in the space of that difference or that discrepancy, it's so easy to start telling stories about you are too much this, well, you're not enough this. And again, it's like that positionality of who do I fear I'm becoming in this story, then cuts us off from being able to be emotionally vulnerable, connected to our partner, working on it as a team, kind of finding a path forward that's a bit more authentic.
So how do you navigate the differences? I mean, because I think this is a big part of why so many people have these issues, because, you know, somebody can show up and say, well, I need this. And it's like, well, is it really a need, or is it just a desire, something that you want to explore? I mean, how do people come to some sort of agreement on how they're going to explore together?
Right. I do think a big part of it is what we're talking about today, what the Taking Sexy Back book is about, I think it's easier to have this conversation as a couple if each partner is grounded in their own sexual self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the conversation is going to be able to go further together if each person has done some deep dive into self about their own, understanding their own sexual story. And so that's really essential. And so I oftentimes so when a couple hits a sexual block, but like, let's just stay on the desire discrepancy example, because it's such a common one for couples. I want sometimes for that couple just to press pause and for each person to do a bit of internal work, because I think what happens is the lower desire person can start to feel flooded with either shame, what's wrong with me, I'm so whatever, prudish, or something's wrong with me. Or then if they're a survivor of trauma, then it becomes like, my trauma broke me. It can become all of these like layers of shame and inadequacy, and oftentimes fear. If I don't give this to my partner, they're going to go find somebody else.
Right.
And so all of that fear then keeps the lower desire partner focused on the other guy, their judgment. What are they going to do next? And what I want the lower desire person to be able to do is have some space to go inside and figure out, what are the blocks? What keeps me from being able to tap into my erotic self, express my erotic self, ask for what I want? Like, where are my blocks? And that process is really hard to do with either an anxious partner, an impatient partner,
Mm-hmm.
or even a partner who's loving, who's just saying, babe, like, whatever you want, I will do. Even if the partner is loving, that question can still feel like a pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And what that lower desire person might do is just say, like, I just need a bit of time and space to just figure out me, and whether that's, I think the book can be helpful. I think obviously therapy can be helpful. And then just start to kind of look. And the reason in the book we do these we look through 7 different lenses.
Yeah, I was going to tell you. Yeah, just talk about that. What are the 7 different lenses? Yeah. Because that's part of the integrative whole.
Right. Because I think that the constraints or the blocks to sexual desire, to feeling entitled to sexual pleasure, the blocks can live in one or more different places. So I really wanted the structure of the book to invite people into a variety of lenses to figure out where do I need some healing? Where is some attention warranted?
And so you want to talk a little bit about the 7 areas, sort of give a guideline of, the different ways that people can look at where they might be blocked.
Yep. And then let's make sure that we come back to talking about the higher desire person as well, because it's not just bringing the lower desire person up, it's also helping the higher desire person maybe have some more pathways into feeling love, feeling connected, feeling safe, feeling playful, feeling joyful. They may need a bit more gateways into that. So, but I think oftentimes in this conversation we talk about like how to help the person have more desire, but it also is sometimes just helping the higher desire person have more ways of regulating and connecting themselves.
Yeah.
So our 7 different frames are cultural. So really taking a thoughtful look at how gendered narratives get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true whether you've been socialized in the masculine or socialized in the feminine, but those stories about who I need to be, who I should be, who I can't be, that can create sexual disconnection, pressure, performance, duty, low, all those kinds of things. We talk about mental, as we were saying before, sort of all the chatter that can come into the bedroom with us, self-critical thoughts, performance-based thoughts. So noticing where the mind goes can be really, really essential for healing. Emotional, this is where we talk about kind of the ways in which prior painful sexual experiences may show up in the bedroom with us, and how to turn towards those, how to invite our partner to be our ally in healing. I think so often survivors of traumas feel like they have to figure this all out on their own, and they can't burden their partner with it. And so in that part of the book, we talk about how beautiful it is when sex becomes a space of healing, right? Sexual healing. And how
love that Marvin Gaye song, by the way.
That was a deep song in so many ways. Sexual healing is a real thing. And it is in some ways that is when a survivor of trauma is able to enlist their partner as an ally in their healing. It is the most powerful way to say that you person who hurt me, you don't get to keep this part of me. This is mine. It was mine. You hurt this. You did not break this. Like my sexual self is bigger and stronger than you ever get to be.
Amen, sister.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
But it requires us to be able to have a partner who can hold space for that.
Yeah.
Who can listen, just so.
Who can be part of the conduit of healing.
Yep. Mm-hmm. By not getting lost in their own stories, by honoring whatever kinds of supports need to happen, right? Whether we need to keep the lights on for a while, whether we need to go slowly, whether we, whatever those kinds of setting the space, basically the goal is to set the space in such a way that we maximize presence and we minimize dissociation.
Yeah, it's
really,
like it's I feel like that partner has to be really gentle and asking permission every single step of the way. Yep.
And that survivor gets to speak up,
gets to say yes or no.
Yeah. And we also do, we talk about another realm is physical. So here's where we talk about the impact of body image challenges and what it is, all the messages we've internalized about what our bodies need to look like and how that may get in the way. And then just body image in terms of, as we were saying before, getting a mirror out, understanding our own anatomy.
Self-exploration is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, so we call that chapter Couples Therapy for You and Your Vulva.
Yeah, I love that.
And relational. So here is where we talk about talking about sex with a partner. And I've got a whole list of suggestions for sort of scaffolding that conversation, which can be hard because it can be hard. And then spiritual. For some people, there are spiritual constraints where just that first experience of God, sex, and shame, like sort of the unholy trinity of God, sex, and shame, and how to name that, acknowledge that was a part of my past, but actually now I'm going to recreate and I'm going to actually treat sex as a pathway towards spirituality, towards oneness, towards consciousness, which there are beautiful, right? That's the entire nature of Tantra, is the idea that actually sexuality and spirituality have a beautiful relationship with each other through a different lens, right? Through the lens of very traditional religion, oftentimes sex and spirituality have a fraught relationship, but it isn't the only lens. There are practices where sex and spirit actually each amplifies the other.
Well, I always wonder, because oftentimes in the throes of ecstasy, people say, oh God, and I feel like this, for me, from my perspective, I have always felt like sexuality is a sacred experience. It's showing up fully open and present and vulnerable with my heart and soul and body, and meeting my partner and seeing my partner in the same way, you know, not just for the sex, but the whole exchange of energy. And so it can be, if you show up consciously, the holy trinity, the beautiful holy trinity of God, you know, myself and my partner, having this beautiful exchange and really deeply seeing into each other's hearts and souls.
Beautiful. Yep, that's beautiful. Yes, and it is, yeah, it's unfortunate then when the echoes are that what I'm doing is sinful or wrong or against God. Was that a process for you? Because you mentioned before that you grew up Catholic. So what was your process of shifting from that prior mindset to the one that you have now?
Well, I actually never thought about sex with my partner as shameful. I always thought that was a beautiful expression of who I am, but it's all the other mixed messages, you know, of how do I show up? How do I show up and claim my sexuality? I mean, this is why your book is so great. You're sexy. Who is my sexy? Who is she?
Yeah.
Who is she? And that's why because I also heard you say after the Super Bowl about the whole judgments of Shakira and J-Lo. And and when I see them, I mean, I don't know if it has to do because I'm a dancer, and this is one of the ways actually where I feel most sexually expressed when I'm dancing, because I'm completely present and in my body, and I'm not really paying attention to anything else that's going on around me.
Yeah.
But I did, like, even at that Super Bowl thing, my daughter had some friends, and I was going on a disco cruise, and I had bought these really sexy outfits that one of them was kind of similar to what J-Lo was. So I went and put it on, and my kids are like, "You're too old for that." And it was like this, I think J-Lo and Shakira did an amazing job of showing up. It doesn't matter what culture they come from. It's the celebration of women's sexuality.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
So beautiful and powerful.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And it was, I mean, it was like such divine timing that halftime show was like the day before the book came out. And so it meant that I got to, in the TV, the stuff that I had done that week, like that topic came up, like, so what about, it's like, okay, let's break this one down, because it was, as you're saying, it was all the reactions around their mothers, they shouldn't, they're over 40, they shouldn't, you know, this is a family show, they shouldn't, all of these judgments, which are always invitations then to look at our own, like whenever we make that judgment, it's an invitation to look at what is the story that I'm bringing into this lens, right? So your kids, I mean, you walking into the family room with a sexy outfit on and them saying, "Mom, you're too old." It's an invitation for them. They're not going to take you up on, they're not going to do it now, but I hope that when they are themselves in midlife, that they will, you know,
remember.
Yes, that's right. And feel pissy about their adolescent self that couldn't hold on to this idea that you could be at midlife and, you know, and sexual and celebrating that.
Yeah. I mean, all my daughter's friends were like, "Oh my God, you look amazing."
Of course.
You know, but my kids were like, "Ew, that's disgusting."
Right.
We can't reconcile that with our parents, you know, that our parents
No, that's right.
sexual selves.
That's right. Yeah, none of us really want to think about our parents as sexual beings, but how fun that they got to at least hear their friends celebrating you.
I mean, do you find that with your own kids, that you can talk to your kids' friends about all of this stuff, and your parents are like, "Oh God, here she goes again"?
Yeah, it's, you know, I think people make assumptions that we must have just kind of like all these conversations in our house. And I think our house I think I certainly open the door to those conversations. And I do what when I was in graduate school, I had a mentor who talked about, she would do these truth bombs, and she would say to her kids, okay, guys, truth bomb, like I'm going to talk to you for a minute about whatever, some aspect of sex that she wanted to talk to her kids about. And it was always, she would do it in the car, so you're not making direct eye contact. And then she would say, if you have questions, you can ask me questions. And so that's how we've done it in our house. But yeah, I don't know that our kids have any wider zone of tolerance for these conversations than anybody else's kids, just because, but they know that they can. And I hope that as they evolve and, and start to have relationships, I hope that we will feel safe to approach. But yes, so our daughter never shared. She's like, I'm not going to tell anybody about your TED Talk, but some of her friends found out anyways. And the friends were like, your mom's TED Talk was so cool. And, so they could say it was cool, but she was never like, she's not actively ashamed of me, which is good. I think that's good.
Yeah.
She's just not shouting it from the rooftops.
So how do we learn to celebrate our sexuality? Because I think this is where the book is leading all of us.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think we start by, we can celebrate it. We can celebrate our sexuality by allowing our sexuality to just be as it is, right? Without saying that my sexuality has to be Shakira or J-Lo or a porn star or this or that, by just starting quiet, right? Starting quiet and listening. I think we celebrate our sexuality by going back to our senses, right? To really like creating time and space for honoring our senses, because the erotic is cued by the senses, right? And ignited by the senses. And so however that looks, whatever helps us feel alive and passionate and sensual, like connected to the five senses, whether that's for you, it's dance, for me, dance as well is huge. I danced a lot when I would get ready to sit down and write. I would do a little dance party first because that's how that connects me to my erotic self, my passion, my aliveness. Yeah, for sure. And in the book I wrote about like celebrating our sexuality by not being afraid of being greedy. I think so much of the feminine is about making sure there's enough for everybody else.
Giving.
All of everybody else first, controlling our appetites of all kinds. And so there's something about the celebration of sexuality, which is the celebration of greediness, of hunger, of longing. And so it's a really different way to position ourselves around greediness, right? Where usually we're sort of like, oh, no, I have to kind of tamp this down. No, I want us to have partners who can expand with us and be like, okay, like let's have you get bigger. I'm not afraid of your big hungry desire, your big loud orgasm, whatever that looks like, right? So that permission to just fill a space up, I think, is how we celebrate our sexuality as well.
I actually bookmarked that page. Can I read it?
Sure, absolutely.
That was really important. I thought, I'm really glad you brought that up, Alexandra. Hold on. Yeah, okay. Because Esther Perel, whom we both love and adore, yes. She says, sex isn't what we do, it's a place we go. Right?
Love that.
So this is from your book, Alexandra. Pleasure is, by its very nature, hungry, unruly, and selfish. Seeking pleasure begins with a sense that you are entitled to it, that you are worthy by nature of your mere existence of feeling good. Sexual pleasure is about being, not doing, receiving, not giving, present moment focus, not accomplishment. That's powerful.
And it's so, in that way, pleasure is subversive, right? It subverts a lot of who we've been taught we should be.
So that connecting, this is it. It's your whole connection to your entire self. Your connection to your body, your connection to your mind, like the chatter, like getting rid of the chatter, whatever's preventing you or blocking you from receiving that pleasure.
Yeah.
Because pleasure is both giving and receiving, but I think so many times as women we were taught to give. So
Yes.
it's like, I am allowed to receive. My body was built to receive.
Right.
Right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
My body was built to receive, and my clitoris was put in my body only for pleasure.
No other job.
No
that
other
part of your body
job.
has nothing else it's got to think about. Nothing else.
So if I was created in this way, then I should be able to fully honor that.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Fully, completely honor that.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. And there are ways in which the more we continue in the cycle of I shouldn't, I can't, good girls don't, then the more we the more we sort of abandon our own bodies, we abandon our own truths, and it can be hard. I think sometimes when we are aware of how much we've allowed ourselves to be disconnected, just facing that can be really freaking painful. The team that I wrote this book with, my graduate students and undergraduate students that were on my team with me, we spent a lot of time in our meetings feeling mad and feeling sad.
Yes, I'm sure.
And so that's a part of it, right? You can't get to the reclamation until you move through the fucking A.
Yeah, exactly.
All of the times that I was like, no, it's okay, you just go ahead, or that's taking too long, or no, don't go down on me, I'll go down, all the ways in which we just have had the experience of watching ourselves abandon ourselves. We have to hold it with such self-compassion, because you came by every ounce of your self-abandonment, honestly, because you grew up in a world that taught you self-abandon. And you got to grieve it and feel pissed about it to find your way back home, really.
Well, and that's actually, as you know, anger is usually the tip of the iceberg as well.
Yeah.
Right. So it's I'm angry that whatever, and I'm frustrated about whatever, and I'm sad about whatever, and I'm afraid. I'm sad, I'm afraid, I'm feeling lonely and rejected and abandoned. And so how do we as women, and we as all people, learn to show up for ourselves? Because it's not about waiting for somebody else to not abandon us or not reject us. It's about how we can not reject ourselves and not abandon ourselves, and come into this full sense of acceptance of where I am in whatever moment I show up, however I show up.
Yep. The last piece about reclaiming our sexuality, I think, is also making space for the ebbs and flows, and I'm aware that we're having this conversation, mid-pandemic, and there are ways in which this pandemic leaves nothing untouched, including our sex lives and our sexual, whether we're quarantining.
Some people leave it untouched during the pandemic.
Nobody is touching anything, right? And so that's part of it too, right? Sometimes reclaiming our sexuality is saying, like, okay, right now it is not, whatever. And I surveyed my Instagram audience a couple of weeks ago, and you only have a binary choice on an Instagram survey, but it was sort of like feeling frisky or erotic nosedive. And my audience was in a 40-60 split. There were 40% were feeling frisky and 60% were erotic nosedive. And so I think that right there is like, okay, so your sexy is doing something, and whatever it's doing, just honor it in the moment, right? I think it can, whether it's feeling like I really want to, I think it's the situation. It depends on whether we have a partner available, certainly. But if I have a partner available and I'm wanting more sex because it is respite, escape, a port in a storm, fine. If I have a partner available, but I'm really not wanting it because I feel overburdened, afraid, whatever, that is just sort of honoring that versus shaming ourselves or feeling badly about ourselves is another way that we reclaim our sexuality.
Mm-hmm. And even in the ways that we show up, for our sexuality, it's like, am I feeling, this is part of honoring what's right for your body and your senses in the moment. Sometimes I just want to be tender and cuddled and, comforted and have this, intimate connection. And other times I just want it.
Right.
Right. I want to show up in its full power and passion. Yeah. And, so that's where the ebbs and flows happen. And, how do you know until you show up?
Right. That's right. Yep.
And how do you navigate when you show up in a certain way and your partner shows up in a different way, wanting something different?
It is just, we need a healthy dose of humor for all. That's right. I think long-term sexual monogamy is just hilarious in a lot of ways, right? Okay, where are we now? And where are we next week? And Yep.
I can't think about next week because I still don't even know what's now.
Right, that's right. Mm-hmm.
So what do you hope to teach your kids about sexuality?
Everything we just talked about. Everything we just talked about. I want my son to feel comfortable being tender and vulnerable, and I want my daughter to feel comfortable being empowered and boundaried. I want them both to feel, I think that's the saddest part of gender role messages, is that we, cut each gender off of half of the full spectrum of human experiences. And so I want to make sure that each, having a son and a daughter, that they each feel able to access the full range of who they are as people, and full range of what they would be seeking in sexual connection.
As you talk about agency and communion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that it's interesting how that part of the book has really stuck out to people as being a helpful framework, right? So I think we sometimes talk ourselves into corners when we talk about like the masculine and the feminine. It just becomes problematic. It becomes really heteronormative.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to frame it as agency and communion as they're just different ways of being in the world, and there are beautiful gifts in agency, in articulating your needs, of being powerful, of taking leadership. And there are beautiful gifts in communion, being tender, taking care, reading the room, making sure everyone is accounted for. There are beautiful lessons in both of those. And we need both of those in a sexual experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, because, for lifetimes we have been polarized into this version of feminine and masculine, that really they're just human qualities, that we have disassociated from parts of ourselves. And so I feel like a big part of this work and what you're trying to do as well is really bring them into communion and fully integrated all of these aspects of ourself, and acknowledging that they flow.
Right.
It's not either or, it's not black and white, it's not good or bad.
Yep. This afternoon I'm teaching 100 undergraduate students right now at Northwestern, my Marriage 101 class. And this week we're talking about sex. And so I'm aware that in a couple hours I'll be giving a lecture on Zoom all about sex. And there are ways in which this generation they're just leaps and bounds around. They have really broken so many barriers and so many binaries around gender and sex. It's beautiful around gender. And they're such strong advocates and allies for each other. It's really beautiful to see. And that is true. And I think when it comes to like intimate justice, like sort of voice in the bedroom, power in the bedroom, I think that's sort of like the final frontier for this generation. I think there still are like growing edges for many of them around like healing and integrating like how all of that stuff plays out sexually. I think they are strong around looking at They can name gender patterns. They can see them as problematic. It just is, again, like when it comes to sex, it's just hard. It's just a challenging realm. And I don't think they're any better prepared around sex education.
No, they're not.
You know, I think what's different is many of them have family. Well, I think some of them had families where families tried to at least break the messaging, you know, as you're doing with your kids, we're doing with our kids. But we still live in this sort of big, you know, stew of inadequate American sex education. They've grown up with porn in a very different way than you and I grew up with porn. So
yeah, I don't think it's healthy.
mm-hmm.
It's very unrealistic.
Certainly not for sex education.
No. And for just having conscious sex.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah.
Being concerned about a connection versus performance.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the biggest impact. I'm actually working right now with an undergraduate student on her honors thesis, where she's looking at queer students, sex education, and pornography. And she's got really interesting findings around where queer students will report that actually porn was really helpful because their sex education was completely not inclusive of queer sexuality. So at least porn showed images of like what you want is valid, what you want makes sense. You're not the only one who has the desires that you have. Mm-hmm. And at the very same time, porn was problematic because it showed really unrealistic, really quite intimidating images of what sex should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you're taking sexy from an adjective into a noun, because this is, you know, as a woman, you know, I have all of these messages like I have to be sexy in order to be validated as a woman, and I really feel like F you. I don't have to be anything, right? Mm-hmm. It's not my job to perform for you. Mm-hmm. It's my job to just be who I am, however I show up.
Yeah.
And so this is why your work is so amazing. Your Loving Bravely book. I mean, I told you that that Costco guy that I told, that Costco worker that I told about your book, Loving Bravely, should be a guidebook to figure out how to love, because you unpack all of the messages that you received, you know, growing up on how to love and be loving in a relationship. And I think that this book, Taking Sexy Back, is the same way of how to reclaim your sexuality based on unpacking all of the things that you learned growing up. So, I mean, for me, like, I want my kids and all my friends' kids and any future partner that I have to really use your books as a tool for self-exploration and self-discovery, and just really self-understanding and self-acceptance and self-honoring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's where intimacy begins, right? I can't offer something to you that I don't feel really connected to myself. I really can't.
So thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me into this conversation and for celebrating the feminine with me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, every time you posted a quote, I was like, yes. Like all of the things, I just resonate so deeply with what you have to say. So, okay. So my last question that I always ask my guests is, how do you define real love?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Real love is showing up. It's showing up, not, you know, without your filter, it's also showing up without expectation. It's showing up with a willingness to understand that my experience of you is always going to be framed through my lenses. I don't think we ever show up lens free. But I think we can show up with increasing willingness to say, okay, when you said that, here's the story I was telling myself, or when, here's the fear that I'm bringing to the table, or here's what I'm at risk of doing right now. I think that's what real love is just knowing that we are accepting that we're works in progress, and the best we can do is just kind of stay engaged in the mystery.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to put it. Thank you. Thank you so much. So for all of my listeners, I know you will have gotten so much out of this conversation. So please subscribe to the Wake Up to Real Love podcast. And Alexandra, how can people get in touch with you? How can people find you?
Mm-hmm. My website is dralexandrasolomon.com, and then that will have links to all my social media. We do a monthly newsletter with sort of upcoming events and happenings, and I'm active.
Your book club on Facebook?
Yeah, we have a free book club. Yeah, just a Facebook community where we're going through Taking Sexy Back week by week. We went through Loving Bravely, month by month. I go live monthly, and it's a great, Facebook community is another way. And I'm on Instagram quite a bit. And then the books are available wherever books are sold: Amazon, indie booksellers, Barnes & Noble, all the places.
And you're going to be participating in the Real Love Ready Summit?
That's really exciting. Yes, Real Love Ready Summit starts pretty soon. It's 6 weeks. You get a thought leader each week, and you've got daily content, and it culminates in a keynote and a Q&A. And so I am week 6 of the summit. So mid-June, June 18th.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it actually starts on Thursday. So I'm excited about that.
Great.
And I mean, this is what I say at the end of every podcast. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. And that's what your book does.
Yeah.
So I really honor and appreciate all that you're doing, how you're showing up in the world and sharing to help people come to this place of acceptance and love and honor of themselves so that they can give it to each other.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
So, and if anybody wants to work with me on how to create more real love in your life, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at The Awakening with Dawn. So, Alexandra, you're beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
All right, listeners, every day, wake up to more real love. Take care. We'll see you next time. Bye.